I nearly dropped the coffee mug when I opened the door that morning. There she was, standing just a few feet away on my wooden porch. The same lynx I had rescued last fall, her golden eyes locked with mine. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had a cub dangling gently from her mouth. For a moment, I didn't move. I was frozen, half in shock, half in awe. I hadn't seen her since the day I freed her from that rusty trap in the ravine. I never thought she'd remember me, let alone come back. And now, she stood at my doorstep like she knew exactly where she was and who lived here. I stepped back slowly, giving her space. She watched me, unmoving. Then, without a sound, she walked past the doorframe and placed the cub on the floor just outside. I could see the tiny thing trembling. Its fur was thin, patchy. I could count its ribs. Before I could process what was happening, 2 more cubs emerged from the trees at the edge of my yard. They weren't being carried. They walked on wobbly legs, confused, unsure. Their mother sat down beside the first cub, her breathing shallow, her ears twitching nervously. She looked exhausted. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed some leftover chicken from the fridge and slowly stepped outside, laying the food down a few feet from the cubs. She didn't growl. She didn't move. Just watched me, as if she'd already decided she could trust me again. The cubs didn't approach the food. They just huddled around her, too weak to care. I backed into the house and closed the door, just enough to see through the crack. My heart was pounding. This wasn't just a wild animal crossing through. This was intentional. She came here. Hours passed. I kept checking from the window. She didn't leave. The cubs barely moved. Late afternoon turned into dusk, and still, they sat there. I placed out a bowl of water. She nudged it toward one of her cubs. That night, I hardly slept. I left the porch light off, curtains open. Every 20 minutes, I was back at the window. I had questions I couldn't answer. Why now? Why here? Was she hurt? Were they starving? Did she expect me to help? At some point after midnight, I saw her stand up and stretch, then curl around her cubs in a protective spiral. A part of me wanted to go out there and bring them all inside. But reason kept me back. These were wild animals, and I wasn't a wildlife rehabilitator. I was just a guy who once opened a trap and ran for his life. By sunrise, everything looked peaceful. I slowly opened the front door. The air was crisp, but not cold. Birds chirped in the trees beyond. I stepped out carefully. 2 cubs sat close to their mother, licking the last scraps of the chicken I'd left. The third one wasn't moving. It lay just behind her, motionless. My stomach turned. I took a slow step forward, trying not to startle her. She stood, turned to face me, and then looked back at the cub. I knelt down a few feet away, whispering under my breath, "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't move. I glanced at the little body. The tiny chest wasn't rising. No breath. No twitch. No life. Her ears dropped slightly. Her head lowered. That look, I'll never forget it. She knew. I felt a knot in my throat as I watched her nudge the cub gently with her nose. Once. Twice. Nothing. She looked back at me, eyes wide, as if pleading. That's when it hit me. She brought them here not just for food. She brought them because she couldn't do this alone anymore. She was asking for help the only way she knew how. I stood and backed away. "Give me a second," I said. I went inside, grabbed a towel, a large cardboard box, and a pair of gloves. I stepped out again, slow and steady. The 2 living cubs had curled into each other, watching silently. When I got close, the mother didn't move. She stayed perfectly still. I picked up the lifeless cub, wrapped it carefully, and placed it in the box. She followed me with her eyes the entire time. After I brought the box inside, I set down some soft bedding just outside the porch. A blanket, a bowl of fresh meat, and water. She came up that evening again, without hesitation, ate beside her cubs, slept on the blanket, and I sat inside, feeling like I'd been pulled into something I couldn't fully understand. But I knew this, it wasn't over. Something had begun, something that would change everything. The box sat in the corner of my garage, lined with a thick layer of old blankets and a heating pad underneath. I had adjusted it to the lowest setting, just enough to give off a little warmth. The cub didn't move, but I saw faint signs of life, a shallow rise and fall of its chest, barely there. I sat beside it, holding a syringe filled with warm formula. It wasn't much, just a mix I'd researched online, meant for emergency wildlife feeding. I'd worked through the night figuring out proportions and praying I wouldn't do more harm than good. When I gently touched the cub's lips with the dropper, It didn't respond. Then, a weak twitch. I tried again. A few drops entered its mouth. Another twitch. A swallow. I exhaled. I wasn't supposed to be doing this. I knew that. But rules felt so small compared to the life lying in front of me. The mother lynx hadn't left the porch. She was curled under the eaves, watching the garage door. Her other 2 cubs were pressed against her belly, half asleep, half starving. And she didn't make a sound. I whispered to the cub as I fed it, slow and steady. I didn't name it. That felt too dangerous, too permanent. But in my head, I called it the little fighter. As I waited between feedings, my mind drifted to last fall. It was the end of October. I'd been hiking off trail near the old ravine, looking for early signs of mountain runoff damage. That's when I heard the cry, a sharp, eerie sound. At first, I thought it was a hawk. Then I heard it again, lower, desperate. I found her caught in a trap, her leg twisted unnaturally, blood on the leaves around her. She tried to back away, but the chain held tight. I had no idea what I was doing. I was terrified, but I couldn't walk away. It took nearly an hour of talking, trembling, and fumbling before I got the rusted jaws open. She didn't bite. She didn't snarl. She just watched me. And when she limped away, I stood there for a long time, not knowing if I'd just saved her or sentenced her to something worse. Now, months later, she'd come back. With cubs. And that look in her eyes, it wasn't random. She remembered. I left the garage door slightly cracked so she could see inside. So she could see that her cub wasn't alone. Around noon, the front gate creaked. I looked out the window. Brian, my neighbor from across the woods. Retired, sharp-eyed, always quick with an opinion. He walked up the drive like he owned it. "You've got wild cats out here," he said, nodding toward the porch. "I know." He frowned. "You feeding them? Just keeping an eye on them. You know that's dangerous, right? They could attack someone. Or spread something. You gotta call wildlife services." I stayed silent. He looked over my shoulder toward the garage. "What's in there?" "Just tools." He stared at me for a beat longer than was comfortable. "They see animals out here, that close to homes, they'll put him down. You know that, Mike. No second chances." I nodded, but inside, I was on fire. After he left, I sat back in the garage and closed the door fully. My hands were shaking. I had hours, maybe a day, before this spun out of control. That night, I heard the first distant howls. Coyotes. Far off, but too close for comfort. The lynx didn't move. She stayed planted under the porch light, eyes glowing amber in the dark. Every so often, she'd glance at the garage door. Inside, the cub stirred. It had taken 3 more syringes of formula and now slept curled in a tight ball. I didn't sleep. I watched through the window as fog crept in from the tree line. The air turned still, like something was waiting to happen. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a noise. Not from outside, from my phone. An alert. Local wildlife incident reported. Community safety notice. Large feline sightings near the foothills trailhead. That was a mile from me. I didn't know if it was her or another lynx, but I knew what came next. Traps, patrols, maybe even tranquilizer teams. My heart raced. I couldn't hide them forever. At 5, I opened the garage. The lynx stood instantly. She took 1 step forward. I held out my hand. "Easy, girl. He's okay." I slowly picked up the wrapped cub and walked outside. She approached, hesitant. I knelt down, placed the cub gently on the ground between us. For a long second, she did nothing. Then she leaned in and sniffed. A low, deep sound came from her throat, not a growl, but something softer. Relief, maybe. She nudged the cub. He stirred, opened his mouth. A quiet mew. She licked him once, then curled around all 3. I backed away. "Let's see what tomorrow brings," I whispered. But I already knew. Tomorrow wouldn't be quiet. They showed up in a dark green pickup, no sirens, no drama. Just 2 officers from the Department of Wildlife Resources. One of them was a tall woman in a navy field jacket, clipboard in hand. The other was a younger guy, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, like he didn't want to see anything he'd have to feel. "We got a call from someone in the area," she said, stepping onto the porch. Neighbors reported a large feline presence near residential property. I didn't have to ask who made the call. "We're conducting a safety assessment," she added. "Anything you'd like to tell us?" I kept my hands in my pockets. I figured denial was useless. "They've been staying close," I said. "They're not aggressive." She nodded slowly, then gestured toward the blanket where the lynx had been the night before. It was empty now, but fur stuck to the fibers. She leaned toward me. Listen, I get it. It's hard to turn your back on something like that. But these aren't pets. You start feeding them, sheltering them. It confuses the natural boundary. And it puts both them and you at risk. The man beside her spoke for the first time. It's against policy to harbor wildlife. Technically, we can issue a citation. I felt something tighten in my chest. She must have seen it, because she softened her tone. We're not here to cause trouble, but we do need you to stop all contact. No food, no water, no shelter. 2 days. Then we'll follow up. If the animals haven't moved on, we'll relocate them. You understand? I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I had no choice. They left without stepping inside. The moment their truck disappeared into the trees, I sat down on the porch, hands trembling. The cubs were somewhere in the woods. I hadn't seen them since dawn. The mother had taken them away, maybe sensing danger, maybe sensing betrayal. Only the weakest one remained, the little fighter. By sunset, I realized she wasn't coming back for him. He hadn't eaten all day. He lay curled near the woodpile, occasionally twitching. I made the decision fast. Wrapped in a towel, I placed him on the passenger seat of my truck and drove toward the nearest town, 20 miles out. I didn't call ahead. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that he wouldn't survive another night. The vet clinic was closing when I pulled up. A young assistant was locking the front door. Please, I said. I just found him. He's not mine. He needs help. She hesitated, then called over her shoulder. A few minutes later, a woman in scrubs came out, took one look at the bundle in my arms, and waved me in. What is it? She asked as we walked down the hall. Lynx cub. I didn't say more. She laid him on a heated table, checked his vitals, started fluids. How long have you had him? I shook my head. Just found him near the ridge. She studied me for a moment, then went back to work. He's dehydrated, malnourished, but stable for now. I asked if I could leave him there. She agreed, said they'd report it to wildlife, but sometimes the paperwork took a while. That bought me time. I drove back in silence. Halfway home, I saw flashing lights down a service road. Not police, trucks. 3 of them. Big, beat-up rigs with cages in the back. I pulled over and killed the lights. 2 men stood outside, talking. I recognized one from the feed store in town, always bragging about how he'd bagged a cougar once near the water tower. The other had a rifle slung over his shoulder. I didn't need to hear what they were saying. I knew what they were. Poachers. When I got home, I checked the porch. Empty. The blanket hadn't moved. No paw prints in the fresh dirt. I walked around the property with a flashlight, checking under the shed, the woodshed, even the low-hanging branches behind the house. Nothing. At midnight, I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. They're hunting her, I thought. She must have known. That's why she took the cubs. But why leave the weakest one? Because she couldn't carry all 3? Because she thought I'd protect him? Because she didn't have a choice? My phone buzzed. A message from Brian. Hope you took care of your problem. Before someone else does. I stared at the screen. Something deep inside me flipped. This wasn't about kindness anymore. This was survival. Not just for them, but for me too. I was in it now, whether I liked it or not. And something told me, come morning, things were going to get worse. I left before sunrise. My truck rolled slow over the gravel, tires crunching under the weight of everything I was carrying. My old trail camera, a bag of raw meat, and a worn backpack stuffed with gauze, a flashlight, and a hunting knife I prayed I wouldn't need. I parked half a mile from the ridge and continued on foot. I didn't want anyone to see where I was going. If Brian or anyone else had called those poachers, I couldn't let them know I was out here. The forest was thick, but the morning mist made it feel unreal, like stepping into someone else's nightmare. I scanned the underbrush constantly, looking for signs, paw prints, broken branches, any disturbance in the soil. It didn't take long to find them. A narrow path of flattened grass snaked through the trees, fresh claw marks on a fallen log. Then fur, golden gray, stuck to bark. I followed. A half hour in, I spotted it, blood smeared on a patch of rocks near the creek bed. Not a lot, just enough to tighten my throat. I set the trail camera on a high branch overlooking a bend in the path and baited the area with the raw meat. If she came back, I'd have proof. Or if they came back, maybe I'd catch their faces. But I couldn't just wait. Somewhere ahead, she was still out there. Hunted. Meanwhile, in the deeper stretch of forest 2 ridges over, the lynx moved low and fast through the shadows. Her muscles ached. Her side burned from a fresh graze. Buckshot, maybe. Not fatal, but enough to weaken her. She pushed forward anyway, ears tuned for the slightest crack in the brush. One cub trotted beside her, stumbling every few feet. The other, she didn't know. They'd gotten separated when the gunshot started. She'd turned back once, searching, waited, called with a soft chirp. But no reply. The forest was too loud, and she couldn't go back. The smell of blood clung to her. They could follow it. She needed to find cover. A hollowed tree, a cave, anything. She pressed on. Around noon, I reached the clearing near the cliffs. Years ago, I'd found a fox den here. It was quiet, surrounded by sheer rock on 3 sides, with only one narrow entry point. If I were her, I'd come here. And I was right. I found the first real sign near a patch of lichen-covered boulders, deep crimson smeared against the stone. Feathers scattered, maybe from a bird she'd caught. Then a trail of paw prints, irregular, dragging slightly. 1 foot injured. She was close. I rounded a large pine, and there she was, collapsed near the base of the rocks, her body curled around something small. Her breathing was ragged, shallow. Her side, covered in dried blood. Her eyes fluttered open when I stepped closer. "Hey, girl," I whispered, kneeling slowly. She didn't move. The cub beneath her stirred. It mewed softly, then went still again. I reached into my bag and pulled out the gauze, but I knew it was useless. The wound was deep, already infected. What she needed was beyond what I could give. But I could be there. I sat down beside her, pressing my back against the rock. "You made it far," I said. "You fought hard." She blinked at me. Just once. I didn't touch her. Not yet. I didn't want to rob her of the last thing she still had, choice. The cub climbed onto her leg, then slipped, too weak to hold itself up. I caught it gently. Small, barely breathing, but alive. She didn't resist. "Okay," I whispered. "I got him. You rest now." I wrapped the cub in my jacket and placed it inside my pack, padding it with soft fabric. When I turned back, she was still watching me. I moved closer, slid my arms under her fragile body, and lifted her. She didn't flinch. Her head rested against my chest. We made it 50 yards before her breathing changed. Shorter, softer. "Don't do this," I muttered. "Not yet." But by the time we reached the truck, she was gone. I sat there for a long time, holding her. The cub stirred, nuzzling against the inside of the jacket. Then the realization hit me. There were supposed to be 2. I checked the den again. Nothing. Circled the area twice. No tracks, no sound. Just empty woods. 1 cub was missing. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky was bleeding orange into the edges of twilight. I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, her body across the passenger seat, still and weightless in a way that felt wrong. I didn't want to move. I didn't want this part to be real. Then I saw it. Near the porch, barely visible in the fading light, a tiny shape curled into the corner of the steps. The weak cub, the one she'd left behind. I shot out of the truck, forgetting everything else. He was breathing, barely, his eyes half-lidded, his limbs twitching like in a fever dream. I picked him up gently, pressed him to my chest, and whispered things I didn't even understand. Maybe to him, maybe to her. I carried them both inside, set her down on an old wool blanket in the corner of the living room. She looked peaceful. It was cruel. I laid the 2 cubs beside each other, wrapped in warm towels, and sat with them through the night. Fed them in shifts, drop by drop. Kept the wood stove going. Every few minutes, I checked for movement. Around 3 in the morning, the wind shifted. Something outside stirred. Not wind, not branches. I opened the door slowly. The forest was silent. Then one sound. A high-pitched mewl, soft but clear. From the tree-line, a shape emerged. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, my mind filling in what I wanted to see. But it stepped forward, limping slightly, favoring one paw. The 3rd cub. I ran to meet it halfway, crouched down, arms open. But I didn't touch it. I waited. It came the last few steps on its own. I scooped it up and whispered, "You made it, you little bastard." The other 2 stirred when I brought him inside. The 3 of them sniffed, pawed, touched heads. Quiet, wordless reunion. Like they knew. Like they understood something I never would. She didn't move. They curled against her still body. For hours, they didn't budge. I didn't either. When the sun rose, I stepped outside. The world looked the same, but everything felt different. I walked down to the shed, Dug a space near the edge of the trees where the sun hit in the morning. No markers, no stones, just earth. I carried her there myself. It took the strength I didn't know I had. I didn't expect them to follow. But when I turned, they were standing there, all three, watching. I knelt and opened my arms. They didn't move. Instead, one by one, they walked to the fresh earth and pressed their noses into it. And then they were gone. Weeks passed. I kept the cameras up around the property, just in case. Every few days, I'd catch glimpses, blurry figures passing through the edge of frame, 2 sets of glowing eyes, then 3. They were alive. They were growing. I stopped reporting sightings. Didn't respond when wildlife services followed up. I knew the risks. I didn't care. Brian stopped coming by. Word probably got around that I was crazy. Maybe he was right. Maybe you had to be. The days got longer, then shorter again. It happened near the start of fall. I was pouring coffee, staring out the window, when something shifted at the tree line. 3 lynx stood there. Bigger now. Stronger. One had a scratch across its nose. Another carried a limp rabbit in its mouth. They didn't come close. Didn't ask for anything. They just stood, watching, and I watched back. Then they turned, one by one, and slipped into the woods. I didn't follow. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, quiet. They were part of the forest again. And somehow, so was I.